Chapter 14. Ideas are more important than guns. If we wouldn't let our opponents have any guns, why would we let them have ideas? Joseph Stalin, Socialist. The next 2 days of travel passed uneventfully. They refilled their water several times from streams that flowed free and clear down the hillsides. Dave either treated all the water with purification tablets or used his filter. Even the most clean-looking water could have Giardia cysts in it. Away from treatment and modern medicine, diarrhea could kill, as it did thousands of kids in the third world every year. Dave's radio reports came in as expected. All was well at home. While scanning the AM bands, they heard the story of the governor's speech and the federal response, which was to place more pressure on the state to accept foreign security forces. Several other state legislatures followed suit the next day with declarations of their own. The talking heads from the mainstream media were calling for the removal of the politicians who had so obviously lost touch with the needs of the people, not seeing it was they who had lost that touch years before. All over America, dividing lines were being drawn. As in the period leading up to the Civil War of the 1860s, this crisis had been brewing for years. The difference this time was that half the country was unaware it was even happening. The American press, supposed bastion of freedom and truth, had long hence sold its soul. Controlled by a handful of wealthy liberals and guided at the newsroom level by bigoted editors, the print media rarely offered more than a token glimpse of any viewpoint that differed from their skewed view of the world. On the issues of gun control, abortion, child rearing, homosexual marriage, welfare, taxes, foreign aid, among other things, the view from the press room was vastly different from the view where Mr. and Mrs. America struggled to raise moral, decent families while being bombarded with bromides assailing their values and views daily. The press couldn't even see the irony in how they treated the last war. Mention was never made of the complacency and outright support the Muslim clergy in America gave to terrorists on our soil. American soldiers of the Islam faith who attacked American troops, aided and abetted prisoners, and even gave information to terrorists that allowed them to kill many more Americans were referred to as if they were aberrations, each broadcast an article taking time to explain that these people did not represent mainstream Islam. However, as soon as an abortion clinic was bombed, an outspoken homosexual activist was murdered, a strange sect was caught starving their children, the perpetrators were depicted as being mainstream Christians, typically white. Never was mention made that these people were aberrations. Never were their acts explained away, validated, or justified by a fawning press. When scandal rocked the Catholic Church, the crisis led the headlines for weeks. Little or no mention was made, however, on the fact that the majority of the sex abusers were homosexuals. Don't want to offend the fairies, you know. Or maybe their orientation wasn't really a factor. Straight folks do it too, they maintained, although they failed to provide any figures for that claim. Better to destroy an institution of faith than offend perverts. When a male couple kidnapped and molested a 14-year-old boy, abusing him, killing him, and encasing his body in concrete, little mention was made, again, of the fact that the abuse was homosexual in nature. The story quickly faded to Section B, page 15. However, the ups and downs of celebrity love affairs were front-page news for weeks. During the first Clinton administration, serious questions about the finance of his campaign, the Chinese connection, Lipo Group, his whoremongering and drug use, the sale of secret documents by State Department employees, and a host of other scandals were given wordplay, then explained away, the party line never questioned. When he bombed Afghanistan and the Sudan, on the same day testimony was being given that would implicate the president in perjury, the timing was not questioned. The press was not only guilty of aiding and abetting, they were enablers, covering up scandal by giving legitimacy to every alibi or excuse, no matter how outrageous or unbelievable. As the mainstream news media lost viewers, independent news organizations, the loony right, according to the same mainstream press, experienced a surge in their audience. However, the left-wing activists and their well-oiled apparatchik were effective in using the courts to their end. Lawsuits for slander, libel, and defamation of character drained the networks of money. The owners of said stations treated them as entertainment sources, not news sources, which undermined the credibility of their stories and employees. Eventually, members of the establishment left would not even appear on shows on these networks. The establishment right was, as was typical, had no solidarity against the left and no real game plan to thwart the constant propaganda attacks and misinformation. In the few years before foreign troops landed on U.S. soil, invited by a sitting U.S. president, it was only half-jokingly suggested that the Republican Party was actually run by the Democrats to give American people hope that there were two parties to vote for. Democrats supported abortion on demand. The Republicans, abortion in some situations. The Democrats supported almost all gun control. The Republicans, only some gun control. The Democrats wanted total control of America's healthcare industry. The Republicans only wanted to nationalize part of it. Oh, and dear God, if the press actually called it nationalization. Too Soviet. They were making health care available, quote unquote. Newspeak. Winston Smith would be familiar with the way things were being done here, hiding the reality behind a word. Gay went from meaning happy to meaning sodomite in a generation. Making health care available replaced theft, replaced nationalization, replaced slavery. A large portion of America remained oblivious to what was going on around them, like the characters of a science fiction movie, unaware of another dimension sharing space with them. They swallowed the press's lies, or simply tuned out the constant repetition of lies, disconnecting from policies and policy, flotsam and jetsam, and the tidal wave of society. Blissfully unaware, they would bleat loudly and vigorously if the obvious were pointed out to them. No time, too busy cutting the lawn, watching the game, working to pay taxes, pay bills, being lobotomized by primetime TV, to really get involved. Not my job, you know. My father was a Democrat-Republican apathetic fool, and I am proud to be the same. You're paranoid. Others could read the writing on the wall. One only had to be a student of history to see the road ahead. When the Roman patrician class became too self-absorbed to defend itself and filled the army with barbarians, Rome's fate was sealed. How can a society endure when its own citizens who reap its rewards care not enough to defend it? In America, defense of the nation increasingly was viewed by the establishment as service one step above abortion clinic bomber. Every sacrifice, every hardship was denigrated at every turn. The military was assaulted endlessly for the smallest mistake, the tiniest growing pain. Any good the military did was screened by the dust cloud of anger thrown up by the left. Most people had no idea what went on in the military and had no concept of the military's good points or recent accomplishments. With the destruction of America's middle class, which was the real strength of the country, America was quickly being reduced to just another socialist state, power being derived from the government owning the fruits of its subjects' labors. With the nationalization of health care, the standardization of schools, the nationalization of utility services, and further expansion of the federal government into everything from banking to trucking, the nation was fast slipping into a mixture of socialism, where everything is owned by the state, and fascism, where privately owned companies are directed by the state. And the American public at large had no clue, nor did they care to. A small percentage of the American public that did care was victimized by the press, but their claims to this truth were dismissed as being frivolous whining by those not concerned for the greater good, quote unquote. They were not being represented by their elected officials. Well, we are a democracy, aren't we? They were elected fairly, weren't they? The schools were not teaching the fundamentals. Well, they are trained educators. What do you know about education? Homeschooling? Parents aren't qualified to do that, and besides, it's the state's job to indoctrinate teach your kids. Firearms? The Founding Fathers didn't mean assault weapons, they meant muskets. And besides, they're for the National Guard. Of course they didn't mean hand-crank printing presses too. Don't be absurd. We control those, or who was ever hurt by ideas, we mean. As history demonstrates, you cannot for long suppress the free man. He will revolt and either be free or dead. Either is preferable to slavery. You can destroy him, you can enslave him. But as long as that spark of liberty remains imprinted deep in man's genetic code, those who seek it will find it. By the sword we seek peace, but peace only under liberty. Massachusetts state motto. Ironic, no? Dave, Rhonda, and Tony were going over Dave's topographic maps and discussing their route for that evening. It looks like we'll cross the border tonight. It's about 7 miles by the route we're taking. Will it be guarded? Asked Rhonda. We won't know till we get there, replied Dave. But we'll continue as before, with caution. I'll walk point ahead of you. We'll probably be pushing the range of the radios, but it should give us enough of a cushion should I run into anybody. Rhonda and Tony's heads nodded. Before we move, I'm going to let my friends know we're coming. They can meet us as far south as they can go. Maybe tomorrow we can ride the rest of the way in safety. Rhonda stated, That would be awesome, Dave. Tony nodded his assent. I can't believe we're so close. They all reflected on the map. They had covered a lot of ground given their situation. The kids were holding up really well. They had eventually decided that Dave wasn't going to scout them and had warmed up to him again, although at times it seemed they had their doubts. But they had somehow adapted to keeping things as quiet as possible and suffered the nightly walks in silence. The weather was still bright and clear, chilly in the daytime and cold at night. The further north they got, even at 10 or 15 miles a day, brought them closer to cold weather and higher in altitude. They were glad to be ahead of the cold weather that November would surely bring. Packed and ready to go, the family, whose name Dave had only recently found out was Antonetti, waited for Dave to send his radio transmission. Dave was sitting on his pack, radio at his side, antenna strung up over a convenient branch. Using the code sheet, he was carefully composing a message to his group. Rechecking his work, he put away the code and notebook, stowed his pencil stub, and picked up the radio. Angry Fellow 22, this is Minstrel 66. Do you copy? Over? Static. Angry Fellow 22, this is Minstrel 66. Come in. Over. A staticky voice answered. Minstrel 66, this is Angry Fellow 4. Go ahead. Over. Adding the last two numbers together meant that they were not under duress. Under duress, or someone trying to imitate his contact, would have used 22. Message follows. Break. Dave lit up on the key and pushed a preset button, jumping to another frequency per their SOP. 1, 547, 9, 8, 15, 21, 13, 13, 54, 11, 75, 65, 65, 33, 81, 20. Over. 66. I copy. 1, 547, 9, 8, 15, 21, 13, 13, 54, 11, 75, 65, 65, 38, 81, 20. Over. That's correct. 66 out. Dave shut off the radio and signaled Tony and his family to move out. He then stowed the antenna, recovered his pack, and followed them into the twilight. Their movement would take them through the last few miles of the state park they had logged in that day. They followed another hiking trail for several miles. The further they got from the main park, the more unused the trail seemed. After crossing a barbed wire fence into private land, they paralleled the property line, recrossing the fence where the property line ended. Once again in the woods, they had to break brush for just over a mile to reach the next trail. Before reaching the next trail, they had to cross a road. Dave broke squelch twice, meaning stop. Then he broke it once, and after a slow 3 count again, he heard the family moving up to him fairly quietly. Dave and Tony leaned together so that their heads almost touched. Road ahead, said Dave. I'll do it like before. I'll go first, check the road, cross and clear the far side, then let you know with 3 clicks. You watch the road to your left, I'll watch it to mine. Rhonda will escort the kids over. I'll tell her. Dave slowly approached the road, what he considered the most dangerous area to cross. They had seen no sign of any police or troops in the wood, although there had been a few helicopters flying over during the day. He stopped to listen. For 5 minutes he listened intently, hearing nothing. One good thing about the gas crisis, not much false alarm traffic. He cautiously approached the road and lay down under a bush. Looking up and down the road, he saw nothing. Pushing off with his arms, he rose to his feet and darted across the road, slowing before the far side shrubs and entering the wood line slowly. He turned and dropped his pack and listened again. Nothing. He explored the far side, finding dark trees and silent plants. He keyed the radio and returned to the road. Shortly after, Tony appeared. He and Dave taking their positions, an adaptation of a technique called scroll to the road. Normally, the security would have been relieved by the next man in line, but tonight they would let the kids and Rhonda cross between them. The kids crossed in pairs, Jake leading little Jennifer, then Rhonda, then Julia and Carolyn. Giving them enough time to go into the woods about 50 yards, Tony ran across, his pack flopping against his back. After he passed, Dave left the roadside and entered the woods. Recovering his pack, Dave again took the lead. They hit the trail after a half hour of tough going. Dave called a halt to drink and treat more than a few scratches on arms, hands, and faces. They again took the trail as it curved around an old cemetery and then climbed another hill. This one took them across a spur that gave them a starlit view of the land beyond. "New Hampshire," whispered Dave. "This isn't paradise, but you can see it from here," he mused. Quickly crossing the spur, Dave followed the trail down to the first of several steep parts, where the trail seemed to end abruptly at rock ledges. The trail turned here, and the climb up or down was tricky. Dave lowered his pack down via 550 cord and waited at the edge. Rhonda and the kids soon arrived. Dave, pointing out the danger, had Rhonda move the kids off the trail a little way. With Tony covering, Dave made his way down the rock face and did a quick scout down the path 100 yards or so. Coming back, Tony lowered the family's packs to Dave, who moved them to one side. Tony then lowered Jennifer to Dave by both her arms. Dave caught her under the arms and parked her on his pack. "Stay right here, Peanut," he said quietly. "Okay," came her answer in the dark. One at a time the kids came down, then Rhonda, then Tony. Saddling back up, they again headed down the trail, crossing several more ledges and drawing even closer to their goal. They were running out of dark when Dave conferred with Tony. "I had planned on crossing into New Hampshire here. It's about 3 miles. We cross a golf course, enter farmland, and then yet another state park, this one just over the border. There's a bird sanctuary on the other side we can stay at if we need to." "Let's do it then," said Tony. "We're almost there." "Okay, let's go." Hiking up their packs for what they hoped was one last stretch, Dave led them around the perimeter of the golf course, its once manicured fairways overgrown and mangy looking. They crossed through the expansive backyards of several condoplexes and followed a dirt path into the woods behind the clubhouse. They saw no lights, heard no noises. They didn't even smell wood smoke, which would have indicated habitation. The trail wound through the woods, carrying them for a time next to a babbling stream that trembled past them towards the golf course. The trail wound steadily upwards, taking them up the last hill and the crossover out of Massachusetts. Dawn was dimly approaching as they crossed the border on a level trail. Dave was in the lead, crossed by an open area on the right that was a parking spot for day trippers and bird watchers. The path was partially screened by trees and mountain laurel bushes, but Dave still felt exposed. He quickly passed it and radioed Tony and Rhonda. "There's a parking area to your right coming up. Hurry past it. Other than that, it's a clear shot." Dave heard them acknowledge and then switched his radio to their next frequency. As Dave turned down the path, he heard a sound from the opposite direction. He paused, then grabbed at his radio, shouting into it, "Tony, Rhonda, get off the trail. I hear trucks. Now." Tony's breathless voice came over the radio. "They saw us. 2 big trucks and..." The sound of a machine gun fire drowned out Tony's words. The bullets flew over Dave's head, some smacking loudly into tree trunks, others whizzing through the boughs. Dave dropped to a prone, facing the fire, unbuckling his pack even as he fell. He quickly grabbed the 2 frags and the smoke off of his belt and stuffed them down his shirt. He heard another burst, this time from a small caliber automatic weapon. He launched himself to his feet, calling out to his wards as he ran to the sound of guns. "Over here! Tony, Rhonda, kids, over here!" Another burst of fire, up in the trees again. The sounds of shouts in German. Dave saw movement and brought up his rifle, skidding to a stop behind a large tree. Carolyn and Julia ran from the bushes like frightened rabbits. They saw Dave, who yelled, "Dump your packs and follow the trail. We'll get you later." The girls shed their packs as they ran, and Dave turned his attention to the front. Jake ran down the path carrying Jennifer. "Follow the path," Dave pointed. Jake nodded and redoubled his efforts as more fire slapped through the trees. Dave again went forward as he heard a long burst of fire from his direct front. He neither heard nor felt any rounds coming near him, and charged forward. Breaking through bushes and coming again to the path, Dave dove down next to Tony, who was reloading his G36. "Where's Rhonda?" asked a breathless Dave. Tony pointed. "Right up there, behind a tree. She's pinned." "I'm going left. I'll hook around that way, so don't fire to the left of her tree, Dave." Dave lowered himself and wiggled forward to have a look. More gunfire echoed through the woods. "I'm going to throw a smoke grenade to the left. You throw yours to the right as far past her as you can. Get her out under the cover. I'll come up behind you, okay? Let's roll." Dave and Tony both ripped the tape off the pins on the smokes and then quickly pulled them and threw them out, well past Wanda's tree. They heard another burst of machine gun fire, and then the smoke started to obscure their view. More fire, rounds whizzing over their heads. Dave did a quick rush to the left and fired a few rounds, his FAL's deep boom echoing through the glen. Rhonda, not being a fool, started crawling to Tony as soon as the smoke started floating back over her. Tony fired a few short bursts to the right of her, even as Dave fired again from further left. Rhonda got up and ran at a crouch to Tony, saying as she passed him, "Let's get out of here." Tony fired up the last of his magazine, turned, and ran after his wife. Dave saw Rhonda crawling and moved to the left again to try and draw attention away from her. He fired a few shots at fleeting figures through the smoke, then dumped the rest of his magazine at a steady pace through the trees to his own left, where he heard what sounded like bodies rushing towards him. Crouching behind a tree and reloading as fast as he could, he released the bolt with his left thumb and reached into his shirt and pulled out the first grenade. He bit the tape with his teeth, grabbing at the end he had folded over to make untaping easier. He pulled it away, let it go, turned into it, and bit again. The tape was free from the grenade. He spit out the tape, letting his rifle fall to its sling. Grabbing the smaller piece of tape, he freed the pin and pulled it, and threw the grenade as hard as he could to his right. Putting the tree between him and the blast, he readied another grenade and threw it to his left. He rolled back and started firing back to where Rhonda had been trapped. As soon as the second frag detonated, he took off at a run, his chest pouch bumping against his chest, his lungs burning. He crashed through bushes and bounced off of small trees as he fled the hail of gunfire that peppered the air around him. Leaping over a small tussock, he heard crashing behind him. He dropped and rolled, coming up behind the big rifle. Right in his sights was a Flecktarn-clad soldier with a G36, firing close enough in Dave's direction that Dave took offense to it. He pressed the trigger, and as the rifle bucked, he saw the figure crumble. He fired quickly at several fleeting shapes in the brush and readied another frag. He heard the shouted commands. Hearing the shouted commands, he released the spoon, counted to 2, and threw it far and high. The grenade detonated in the air near the source of the shouted commands Dave had heard. With a blast, Dave was moving, rushing to the rear in 3-second rushes, falling, rolling over, firing at running troops. He prepped and threw his last frag to his right, where a German in Flecktarn was firing his rifle in long bursts towards Dave's direction of travel. The man disappeared in the black cloud of the grenade's explosion, and waves of leaves and twigs filling the air. Dave rolled to his non-firing side and rose. As he did, he saw another troop struggling to reload his rifle. Dave took a flash sight picture and squeezed. The man flopped to the ground, and at the same time Dave felt a similar sensation of the bolt locking to the rear. Spinning, he rushed once more as his trigger finger released the magazine, which fell to the ground. Dave's other hand was at the same time grasping another magazine from his pouch. As he felt his fingers grasp the .550 pull cord loop on the bottom of the mag, an apparition rose from behind the fallen tree he was headed to. Clad in woodland camouflage, the man held an M249 saw pointed just over Dave's left shoulder. No time to reload. Too far to butt stroke. Dave decided he was history when he locked eyes with the ghostly figure. "Get down," the apparition said.